Back in the 2000s, the US Navy quietly kicked off a program to build a shorter rifle for close-quarter combat that later known as the Mark 18 that civilians love to clone. But it didn't just stop there, because by the time SOCOM was done with it, the Mark 18 had gone through so many changes, starting with the CQBR, that laid the foundation, proving the short barrel concept can definitely work. Then the Navy's Mod 0, and later through SOCOM's broader Mod 1 effort, turned it into a more mature platform through incremental iterations. Finally, the URG-I took it even further. But to understand what actually happened leading up to the URG-I, we have to go back in time to the early 2000s, when the M4's barrel length was just a bit too cumbersome to operate in tight spaces. So for sure they needed something shorter than 14.5. But the problem created two immediate issues according to this Navy Weapon Research Lab named Crane. First is that the ballistic performance isn't as good, and the high gas pressure puts more stress on every part inside this short boomstick. So they went to this company called LMT that has contributed many improvements to the Mark 18 Mod 0. Like the chopped down rear sight from the carrying handle, the barrel, and how it can mount a 203. Second, SOCOM want the shortest barrel that could still reliably accept a suppressor mount without the bayonet lug geometry interfering with the mounting interface. LMT was in the business of building the rifle that the governments trust when they couldn't afford to fail. So think of it as them laying the foundation towards the SOP mod program and many of the later M4 improvements, including the push to use free float rail so nothing touches the barrel to retain accuracy. Long story short, Lewis worked the math and landed on the 10.3-inch barrel design by chopping a 14.5-inch M4 barrel down shorter, and that essentially became the core of the Mark 18. They discovered that this length is the most optimal before it runs into problems. So they re-drilled the gas port, and they built the first SOCOM CQBR upper with a carbine length gas tube. It's literally a drop-in conversion that turned any existing M4A1 into a close quarters rifle without changing the lower. So it looks like this, and with everything standard. However, Colt held the sole source contract on the M4 at that time. And guess what that means? So Colt was going to crack down on anyone for making any new M4 products without going through them first. So it was a business move that pushed LMT out of that specific supply chain. And then Colt subsequently began production of the Mark 18 barrels using the data from SOCOM. So, fast forward, here we got the Mark 18 Mod 0. It looks like an M4, but it's just shorter if you're just staring at a silhouette. So the Navy took some M16A1 lowers and stripped the stocks off, installed a 4-position carbine receiver extension like an M4. And later the CQBR Block 1 program came in. Basically, it was all about cutting costs by just repurposing some existing military M16A2 and M4 lower receivers into Mark 18s. And then they just remarked them. The fire control group stayed fully automatic, and the Navy never touched the burst mechanism. It was semi and full auto only from day one. But it still had extraction and ejection failures under sustained fire on the shorter barrel builds. When the gun gets hot, brass cases expand inside the chamber and grip the walls harder. The extractor had to pull harder against that grip to clear the case. So SOCOM then went back to Crane and got 3 specific fixes that became standard across every Mod 0 and every version that followed. The first was an O-ring that increases the mechanical force the extractor applies to every spent case by a factor of 4, because the original one alone wasn't enough when the barrel got hot. The second fix was a stronger ejector spring. The third was this thing called the McFarland gas ring, because the original one had 3 separate gas rings like this that can shift and misalign under heat. But this one piece seemed to fix the issue. So every bolt carrier group on every Mark 18 built after that point used all 3 of those modifications. So if someone is cloning a Mod 0 correctly, it should have those 3 parts in the bolt. Otherwise, it's not clone correct. So the next was the Mark 18 Mod 1, aka the CQBR Block 2. This is the one people immediately think of the Daniel Defense RIS 2. That quad rail that looks like it's bolted on there, and if you had to name one thing so signature about it on the Mod 1, I mean, this is it, just by looking at it. But if you look closely, it's a free float design. So if you're new to all these things, free float just means the handguard isn't touching the barrel besides the barrel nut. So think of when a shooter grabbed that handguard and pulled downward with a vertical pistol grip. Under high round counts and heat, the barrel's harmonics can change. So why does that matter? SOCOM learned this early, sometime during the global war on terror, that the old RAS handguard couldn't survive the cumulative stress mission after mission. So it's all about reducing stress on the barrel, and of course increase accuracy. With the new handguard, the lights and everything else attached won't exert weight stress on the barrel, so there aren't 2 fixed nodes restricting barrel harmonics. Besides the RIS 2 handguard, what makes a Mark 18 a Mod 1? So first, you got a Mark 12 style low-profile gas block that went under the handguard and it's pinned to the barrel. Some of the classic setups were using these Knights Armament folding iron sights, which was a big improvement from just using fixed iron sights, and it opens up the field of view quite a bit. You got these EOTechs and other optics from the SOP mod program, including the LA5 laser aiming module, replace the older and bulkier PEC 2. But they tend to get loose because they are not using lever locking system. In terms of white light technology in 07, these are nowhere near what we have today. They were not bright enough, and it couldn't shine the light further to see targets clearly, like dense bushes, long hallways, and basically, they sucked. Not to mention, it's not LED, it's weak and the batteries don't last long. It was so bad, even after they switched it to a newer one, operators still had to buy their own that they liked. You can check out this video to learn more about the SOP mod attachments. In terms of optics, the SU-230 was one of the most common optics. This thing can skip these in-between magnifications that most people won't use anyway, so it's immediately between 1 power or 4. So you won't be dealing with something like this annoying stiff dial like on an LPVO. 1 power for close-up, 4 power for identifying or shooting targets further away. The suppressors they were using were the Surefire RC2 and the Knights NT4. The NT4 was mostly used by the Marines MARSOC, and they use different muzzle devices so they can quick attach them. The charging handle moved to the PRI gas buster across some Mod 1 builds. What we learned is that the Navy classified it as a safety feature when shooting suppressed on a short barrel suppressed gun running hot. So hot gas from the suppressor blows back towards the shooter's face. And this charging handle has a sealing lip along the top and bottom of the handle body that prevents that annoying gas blowback, causing watery tear in the shooter's eye. Just imagine you trying to rub your eyes in the middle of a gunfight. No thanks. As far as stock configurations go, it very much varied across Mod 1 builds. This was also the time where there were more options like the Magpul, and other approved options showed up depending on the unit and availability. Pistol grips were the same way, even though these furniture don't necessarily change the core weapon system. The Mod 1 was a platform where operators were configured within an approved list rather than receiving identical builds. In terms of ballistics, the Mod 1 was a 300-meter guarantee gun, even up to 500, but everything past that would still wound. Think of how painful it already is to move if you happen to just have a kidney stone. I say, you would rather deal with that than having multiple bullet fragments stuck in your body, cutting you slowly while you move. It's like putting salt on wound. Which will hurt 100 times more while you're trying to move on an unforgiving two-way range. Yuck. Can you imagine? And at those distances, the Mark II 62-77 grain open tip match ammo, like the ones from Black Hills, performed in ways M855 couldn't. So think of it like throwing a football with a wobble. At shorter distance, it's still doable. But when the distance increases, the more that wobble will eat away the accuracy, especially if the steel penetrator core wasn't fully centered. So the 262 flies at slightly lower velocity but more stable throw that still arrives on target with enough punch. Check this out. One last thing they improved was the trigger, because it took almost 18 years to formally address. Operators were buying commercial aftermarket triggers on issued guns years before the Army officially went with the Geisley Super Select Fire trigger. Now, this one brings us to what is going on now. Some may call it the Mod 2 or the Block 3, but it's really the URG-I with a 12.5-inch barrel, and it's built around the M855A1 ammunition that other guns can't handle well. From this, we can narrow it down to 3 major improvements. The first was the mid-length gas system. It was a huge improvement according to Crane, which has significantly cut down the failure rate of extraction and also lowered port pressure for every fired round. Second was this slick and slim 13.5-inch long Geisley Mark 16 handguard that pinches the receiver tight so it won't tilt or get loose. The Super Duty also has this tab that key into the receiver, so it has more points of contact to hold the entire thing in place, way better than any of these. According to Crane's testing, M-LOK has better rigidity than others, and it's much easier to make than pick rails. And of course, the bolt carrier group was also upgraded with hammer-forged bolts the same way the barrel is made. It just means a stronger bolt. And the third one is this beefy ambi charging handle that is good for suppressor use. But the biggest controversy was that SOCOM switched back to the government profile barrel instead of sticking with the SOCOM profile barrel, so it's the thicker one shown on the left side of this picture. So a lot of people think that was a stupid decision, because this goes way back to the 90s, when the Army spent all the money and time developing a solution to not let the M4's barrels rupture under sustained full auto fire. So, long story short, the fix was the thick SOCOM heavy barrel. So they got that proven to work and they were in service. But now, they just went back to the thinner barrel? And the reasoning the Army gave was that the modern cold hammer forged barrel has way harder steel. So it's like them saying they wished that modern barrel manufacturing technology had existed back in the 90s and they wouldn't have wasted all the money making the SOCOM heavy barrels. But here's the problem. If you think about it, even with just a little bit of basic high school chemistry and physics, you will likely find some chapters on intermolecular forces and crystalline structures that you can write about on gun forums. Just think about it. Hardness doesn't govern temperature threshold where steel fails. When any material reaches their ultimate failure point, even harder steel can fail the same way softer steel does. So why would you go with a thinner barrel then? Anyway, please check out these resources. And if you like this type of content, be sure to like and subscribe, and you may enjoy these ones too.